myself an elder because at home, to be an elder needs to go through a process of recognition by the community as an elder. Sometimes it's not age that qualifies you as an elder. So if it was age, I would have been an elder a long time ago. But it's certainly one of categories that people are looked on as having wisdom. And I don't think I'm there yet, so, but maybe someday.
For a lot of us that have been following the UN process related with Indigenous peoples, you are full of wisdom. And what we expect is that you continue sharing that with the younger generation. Mm-hmm. Can you share where you come from and how are the youth organized?
Well, I live in the north of Sweden. I'm Sami, and the Sami we live in 4 countries, north of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Kola Peninsula on the Russian side. So I'm here representing Sami Council. So I'm actually not here for a youth organization. I would say if it's about age, I'm not youth. But I guess when you talk of my perspective of elder and youth, I guess it has the also to do with experience. And I'm so glad that we have all of you who have been doing this work for so long and done such a tremendous job, and that you're still here so that us coming into these processes can learn from you how you have been, so we can learn the history. It's invaluable for us coming into these processes.
Well, thank you. Maybe can I ask anyone here over 40? I see 2. Well, so the reason I'm asking that, this is my 40th year on the Declaration. And before that, of course, we're another couple of years. So it's been a long journey, but I'm really honored having traveled that path, but also equally willing to share our experiences. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Chief, would you like to share with the younger generations what are the lessons that you learned in those 40 years with the UN Declaration discussion and now the 10 years of implementation?
Well, I think the biggest lesson I learned is that you can never give up. It's about perseverance. And I think many times we felt like it's of no use, we're not going to succeed, and we just kept going. And I think it was because of the spiritual guidance that we had from our elders that encouraged us to continue and continue. So if there's one lesson, is of course never give up. And personally, on a personal note, I think when I think back about my own, what was it that helped me? And there were 2 things, actually. A lot of prayer and a lot of exercise. Because you have to be physically and spiritually prepared as well as mentally. And I think that balance was important, and that's what the elders taught us.
And from your point of view, 10 years of the implementation of the Declaration, what has changed in the life of Indigenous youth in Sweden?
Well, for starters, I would like to say that what you say of just these processes takes a long time. And that's what you're saying. You've been working for this for such a long time. And I guess the Declaration, it's such a milestone, if you look historically, about the work that has been done before and that it was actually adopted, and now we have it. And I guess now it's the matter of implementing it, getting the commitments stated through the Declaration into concrete action, so that we actually can see change in the ordinary lives of Indigenous peoples around the world. And I think that's where we are now. I don't think that we're not there yet. Of course, we're not. So I guess we have something to live up to, and the Declaration gives us it gives us something to measure everything against. We can measure actions taken against the Declaration and we can say that this is not enough. This is where we should be, or we can say that okay, now we have actually taken a step forward. So I guess that's what this declaration means to me. It's something that it's to show that the processes and the long-term commitments to this work, it's worthwhile because we can get there. But it also is something to measure the actions taken at home too.
I think that's very important observation. A part of the difficulty we had with the declaration was the process at the UN. And by that I mean when we were working under a different set of rules, I would say. For example, the working group on indigenous populations, I don't like that word, but the working group, it had a rule that if there was no consensus, you had to start over for another year. So you started over each time. And it only took one state to say no. They didn't have to explain why they said no, but they said no, and that started you another whole year to do that. So that was a part of the long time process because of the way the UN operated then and still does in some cases by consensus, and if one says no, then you start over again. Compared to the ILO, for example, which is a 2-year process. It's specific, it's mandated that it be done in 2 years, and convention like the one on indigenous peoples took 2 years to amend. So there's 2 different processes, and one of the difficulties was the rules of procedure itself. But now we're there, we're done. We've got no, I shouldn't say we're done as far as the declaration we are, because it's the implementation challenge that we have now to complete. And I have to tell you, I co-chaired a lot of the meetings at the UN through the process of developing the declaration. And when it was brought to a vote in Geneva, Canada had voted against it. When it was brought here, after an intersessional working group, Canada voted against it. Eventually, they changed their position in 2010. Last year, you heard it here that they had changed their position completely to complete support without qualifications. Now, I never thought I'd see the day that would happen when you compare 40 years to how long.
Today they reaffirmed that.
That's right. And for me, that's such an affirmation of that willingness to keep going, to keep after your people's dreams and wishes, especially the elders, as the instructions they gave us on why we needed to go internationally and to keep going. So now in our country, we have a prime minister that mandated the Minister of Indigenous Affairs to implement the declaration. And that's a big change. That took us 38 years to get to that point. Now, of course, our eyes are on implementation, and thank you for raising that, because you're inheriting that. You, the young people in the room, are inheriting that from us. But we're always there in terms of trying to guide in the best way that we can based on the experiences that we
representing the young people in the room and the ones that are seeing this program. What, from your point of view, are the main challenges for inheriting that? How do you see the youth continue without stopping and respecting the mandate of the elders? Sometimes I feel like our youth, they're having so many problems to follow that path. How do you feel about that? And what would be some of your recommendations?
Well, we have certainly something to live up to. And I actually feel that young people are very committed and very willing to work for indigenous people's rights. And for the Sami people, we have we have our youth organizations are extremely active, and they are very involved. And we meet them here at the Indigenous meetings and the international meetings all over the world. So they are, I feel that young people now are actually pushing the established the Sami parliaments and the other established or Sami organizations to actually take actions and to be this. I think that the youth actually are up to the task. Yeah.
And Chief, how can the elders support that struggle of the youth? Now that, I would say, after 40 years, how can we support that?
I think there's an opportunity for us to converse, like we are right here, elders with the youth. And that's important, that communication and dialogue is critical to going forward. Because there are some things that we may have experienced in the past that might be helpful. Bearing in mind that you're in a totally different set of circumstances as young people, sometimes beneficial circumstances with, for example, the media, the communication technology that's available there to communicate with each other across borders or around the world. And I agree, the young people have been very, very active. I cannot forget a very powerful intervention by the Sami youth, for example, on a very, very difficult and challenging issue of suicide, youth suicide. And it was the young people expressing how hurt they were about those instances happening in their communities. And that was a very powerful message, and they took it among themselves to carry that. By the way, to get that topic on the agenda here at the UN was a very difficult challenge. But once it was there, it was the youth, like the Sami youth, who carried it the rest of the way to call attention to the world about that situation. So I think we are in good hands with the young people that are coming here, for example, with the Youth Caucus, how they surround each other when there's a speaker, breaking all kinds of rules, but they do it anyway to support a youth person, and I think that's amazing.
What would be your final message for the youth to continue in this struggle, the Indigenous youth and the other type of support we need to build with the rest of the youth, non-Indigenous?
Well, I guess it's up to the youth to keep on the struggle, because as we say, we have the declaration, and we are so lucky that we have had our representatives going through with that work and seeing it to the end, so that we now have the declaration. And now the next step is implementation. And I guess that's where we are now. So I guess with the guidance from those working this far, I think that we just have to keep on the pressure. Yeah.
And Chief, in your 40 years of experience at the UN, how have you seen women and men from Indigenous peoples' participation, something that we can share with the youth?
Actually, that's it's interesting you asked me that, because it was in my mind when I'm thinking back at the first session of the Permanent Forum, for example. We as members decided to make women's issues a cross-cutting issues, so that it didn't matter what was on the agenda: development, environment, human rights, education, health. Women's issues were going to be cross-cutting all of that. Then the following year we took children's issues and youth, and made that a cross-cutting issue, so that we see, for example, from afar, sometimes cycles where there's very, very strong women leadership taking their rightful place in the room, and for us to step back and let that happen. Because, for example, the UN itself declared a long time ago that their goal was 50-50, 50% women, 50% men. But it was the Permanent Forum which has been the only mechanism in the UN that accomplished that, in fact exceeded it, where at some point of our history at the forum, there were more women representatives on the forum, which was really important because you carry a different perspective than we as men, and that was a very important advancement in the promotion of the rights of Indigenous peoples. For example, to hear from you as mothers or to hear from you as grandmothers, I think that was critical, a step forward. So women have played a very, very important role. In fact, I'll have a little confession. When I saw the development of the women's movement at the UN, I watched what they did. And I saw how they were very successful, for example, going across borders by not allowing them to be marginalized. Because in some instances, they would say, well, you have the Permanent Forum, take their issues over there. And we say, no, this is a development issue. We need to be at the development discussion. Or this is an environmental discussion. We need to be there. So I saw them do that. And they didn't allow the government structure to marginalize them into only one place. So that leadership, I modeled that, I thought, in my own deliberations and arguments at the UN to make sure that we weren't buttonholed into one place only. And that's all that was available to us, because we have every issue that the UN discusses is about us. And we need to be at all the other meetings, not just our own Indigenous meetings. So women's leadership has been critical.
And with the youth, how do you see that? The men and women leadership in the youth movement now? Would you like to share?
Well, from the Sami perspective, we actually, I think, have to start recruiting young men. Mm-hmm. We have a very strong representative of Sami women. So, and I guess that's a good thing, as you say. And we need the participation from both men and women. Yes.
So I remember our trip to Canada and the important role you played in the peace and the reconciliation commission. Mm-hmm. And when I think about the indigenous youth and the history of colonization, I would like to ask you if you think we are now in the position, after 10 years of the adoption of the declaration, to say to the youth, we have set in place enough mechanisms to overcome that history of colonization.
I don't think so. I don't think we're there yet. But next week's discussion will get us closer to there when we talk about participation of Indigenous peoples at the UN with the resolution that's going to be brought forward that will discuss that particular topic. I don't think we're there yet. For example, I think we're missing in the World Trade Organization. We're missing in the UPR process itself. We're missing in some of the important venues where discussions are happening still today. So we're not there yet, I don't think. We have to keep working to secure our voice and place in other arena, especially now that the world is focused on 2030, the 2030 being the sort of a target. We need to be at every stage of that to make sure that states don't fall back and keep advancing with us on protection of our rights. So we're not quite there yet, I don't think, and I would encourage the youth to seek those places where we're not there yet and talk and participate in those areas. The Declaration on Development, one of the biggest challenges of Indigenous peoples has always been development by others, whether it's private industry and development, but we're not there enough. The business and human rights discussions, we're there, but we're not sufficiently there. So I think there's places where we can still go and advocate for our issues.
So Asa, what can we do to encourage the youth to use these mechanisms and to use these different themes that have been developed by the elders during this last year. What can we do to encourage more of that?
Well, I guess one thing is to show the path into these processes, because it can be a bit overwhelming. The UN, the EU, all these big organizations and all the processes. And I guess through our organizations and our representatives already in these processes, we can give guidance so that youth can find the path in, so they know that this is not unpenetrable. It's possible to be there, and as you say, you can be at these arenas, and you can have a voice there. So I guess that's also the challenge to find the doors to these processes. Yeah.
As you reminded us, 40 years, they have been doing it. So we can penetrate and we can make changes. And of course, if we have a strong youth movement, men and women, that are willing to continue this path, we are only beginning the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So thank you for this conversation.
Thank you.
And thank you for visiting
so much.
our Indigenous Media Zone.
Great. Thank you very much. Keep up the good work.